But when David was on my show, I want to publicly apologize. I was so excited to have him on my show that I realized I was talking a lot of shit. And he was sitting there listening. And I was only like, oh my gosh, I'm interviewing David Weatherly and I'm talking too much. And that was on the podcast. I want to formally apologize, but it was on the Alaskan cryptids, and it was so interesting. That book was so interesting to me that I just couldn't, I was like, dude, I really just had a lot to say. But David Weatherly, everybody.
All right, how's everybody doing? It's been a heck of a day, huh?
Yeah.
You know, I usually am the guy giving the creepiest presentation, but after a couple of these today, I'm not so sure if I'll hit the mark or not. But I am talking about a very creepy topic, and it's skinwalkers. How many are familiar with skinwalkers? Ah, more than I would have expected. So, in order to address this, I first want to tell you about a personal experience. Now, I've been delving into this stuff since the 70s. I'm starting to feel like the old man in the field, especially after that first action figure that Josh had made of me with completely gray hair. But yeah, I started in the 1970s. I knew John Keel. He was a big influence on me. So that gives you kind of a benchmark for what my approach has been. It's been very much the investigative journalist approach. As a guy out in the field, I like to go to locations. I like to talk to people. And there's an old saying that when you start peering into the void, sooner or later things start staring back. And I really believe that. And along the way, I've had some pretty strange experiences. Definitely one of my weirdest experiences was in the early 1990s. How many of you know about the Highway to Hell? A few people. So this is a region in the southwest of the United States. It's called the Highway to Hell, the Devil's Highway. It was originally Route 666. And you can see that it goes through 3 of the 4 corners states. So it hits New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And there are tons of legends around the old 666. The reason they changed the designation was because there were so many people who were disturbed about it, especially Christians who felt like it was the devil's number, it was satanic. But the big reason that they changed the designation was because people kept stealing the signs. Everybody, all these kids wanted the 666 sign, I guess, for their bedroom wall or something. So, this region, this is Navajo territory. This is Native American territory through and through. And the legend of the Skinwalker comes from the Navajo people. Dene, as they're known. Common term is Navajo. When I was driving on old Route 666 in the early 90s, it was probably around 3 o'clock in the morning. I was driving a truck. This is not a semi, it was a moving truck. And I was kind of cruising along. There's no other traffic out there. I learned later why there wasn't any other traffic. But I'm driving along and I see something on the left-hand side out of my driver's window. And it was an animal. And I thought at first, coyote. There's tons of coyotes out there. And they will run alongside vehicles sometimes. So I slowed down a little bit because I didn't want this animal darting out in front of me. And I'm kind of stealing glances over, looking at it. It's pacing the cab. Now I'm going probably 40, 45 miles an hour at this point. And this thing is keeping up. And as I'm glancing at it, I realize it's a lot larger than a coyote. So my next thought was wolf. Now, there's not a lot of wolves in that part of the country, but it's not completely unheard of. There have been some sightings of them. But as I'm watching this thing, I started to get concerned because it was making runs at the cab and kind of weaving onto the road. And then I was getting concerned that it was going to suddenly dart out in front of the truck and cause them to wreck. So I decided I'll just outpace this thing. So I sped up. And it kept up. I hit 50, I hit 55, I hit 60 miles an hour, and somewhere in this range as I'm speeding up, I'm still glancing over at this thing. It went bipedal. It stood up running on 2 legs, still pacing the truck. And that is definitely a moment where the hair goes up on the back of your neck, and it kind of gives you a chill because something something really unusual is going on. Now, I was coming to a bend in the road, and I had to slow down. When I did, this thing sort of bounded off the road, jumped up on some rocks, and just disappeared. I mean, it was, like I said, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, so it's too dark to see where it went. But that was my experience with what I'm sure was a skinwalker. Of course, the big question is, what exactly are skinwalkers, right? This is a shot from the Four Corners region that's actually on the reservation. It's a very spooky place. A lot of people typically think about Southwest and they think about things like this, lots of cactus and desert, and that's true that a lot of the territory does look like that. One thing about it is it's a very magical place. It's a place where a lot of different traditions converge, and there's a certain, mystic aura about the Southwest if you've never been there before. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to address for just a moment this idea of were creatures, because this is found all over the world. These are some of the common ones. This is certainly not all of them by far. Africa is typically, you hear about were hyenas. India, tigers are common. Central America, jaguars. In northern regions, Scandinavia, some parts of the polar north, you hear about transformation into bears. South Pacific, sharks are common. And of course, Europe, we know wolves. In fact, the European werewolf tradition came to the United States and had a big influence on a lot of these early sightings, because these early people came in, especially in the northeast of the United States. They brought these ideas with them, but they were encountering things here that they couldn't explain, except in terms of, oh, it's a werewolf. Now, there's some really curious stories. Obviously, I don't have time to delve into all of this today, but in the Pennsylvania Dutch country, there's some really curious accounts that I have found in very early texts about the Pennsylvania Dutch encountering creatures they said were werewolves that were attacking their logging carts. And they used hex magic in order to defeat these things. One of the reasons I bring this up is because I know a lot of people have talked about different possibilities and potentials to explain these dogmen, werewolves, whatever name you want to use for them. And we get different theories, right? Some people think they're actually physical beings, some kind of evolved bipedal canid, right? But some people think that they're much more supernatural in nature. I can tell you that there definitely is always, with these creatures, some kind of convergence of different magical and traditional beliefs that sort of dovetail into these things. In the Northeast, and in fact in the eastern portion of this country, mostly you hear about the idea of werewolves. And the basis is much more European in nature. Oh, it's someone who was human and they've shape-shifted into a werewolf, or it's some kind of other weird creature that has survived and bred and came to the United States, or was already here because there are Native American tales. Now this carries through until you get to about the Midwest. Indiana, for instance, has a lot of old werewolf stories. There's some in my Indiana book. But once you get out to the West, you start hearing things a bit different, and a lot of the influence came from the Navajo Nation. The influences there are a little bit different because we still have the European influence, but it blended more with Native American and even Hispanic traditions that came in. So ultimately, we get this idea that these creatures are something very different. According to the Dene, the Navajo, these creatures are called Yunagoshi. The Navajo language is very difficult. I only know a small amount of it, and for an Anglo to try to learn it, it shows respect, but it's also a very, like I said, a very difficult thing to do. And the words don't always translate well into English. This roughly translates in various ways. He who trots around on all fours or moves on all fours. He who moves about like an animal. That is a traditional depiction of a skinwalker. Not something you'll see very often, and I'll get into why. Skinwalkers can transform into various animals. These are the most common. Coyote, wolf, dog also is fairly common. Fox, owl, crow, raven, and a ball of fire. Now, some of these ideas come from different traditions. Most of the animals, these are in various native beliefs, a lot of the trickster animals. So in some traditions, especially the Southwest, the coyote is the trickster. Sometimes the fox, owl, crow, and raven all have various trickster-like natures, but also are frequently associated with death or the other world. The crow or the raven, for instance, is seen as a guardian between the worlds. So it's an animal that's able to move from our world to the next world. That means the afterlife or other levels of existence. This is the Navajo Nation. By chance, anybody ever been out to the Navajo Nation? Wow, a few people. So here's a few interesting facts about it. It's the largest Native American reservation in the country, 27,425 square miles. That's larger than 10 states. Okay, you could fit, by comparison, Rhode Island, I think, is something like 1,200 square miles. So you could fit a whole bunch of Rhode Islands into the Navajo Nation. The stats of 300,000 people, that's actually old. It's actually dropped quite a bit at this point. So what's important to understand about this is we're talking about a vast piece of land with very, very few people. It's a very curious place that is kind of desolate, and the people that do live there, of course, they're clustered around a few cities, but then rural encampments here and there, and a lot of just a lot of kind of bleakness in a way. They have their own law enforcement division. They're semi-autonomous. They're probably in some ways the most independent Native nation in some ways in the United States because they've been able to maintain so well. That's a shot from the Navajo Nation. That's Shiprock, which is fairly famous because of the rock formation. It's actually on the edge of the reservation. Now, I'll tell you about one encounter here. This is from 2006. This is someone who says that they were driving on the Navajo Nation. They were going 60 miles an hour. And this is a direct quote. It was a man, at least it was on two legs, and in the shape of a man. It was wearing an animal pelt over the head and shoulders. It looked in my window, laughed, then darted in front of the car. This is a common thing that the Dene will say that Skinwalkers attempt to do. They actually try to cause people to wreck. They're very chaotic in that sense. They like to cause not just mischief, but outright harm and evil towards people. It's just another view of the Four Corners region, just to give you an idea of how vast it is. Absolutely stunning place if you ever get a chance to visit. Just a few of the powers of Skinwalkers. They can shapeshift into full or partial animal form. So, just like the werewolf, they can go into full wolf form, or they can be something in between, sort of the classic depiction you see of a bipedal, werewolf figure from a horror movie. They can mimic the abilities of the form they steal. So, if they decide that their animal is going to be an owl, for instance, then they can fly like an owl. They can have excellent night vision. They gain the abilities of that animal, but they don't completely lose their human abilities either. They also said be able to exert mind control on people. One of the things they can do is influence people that they encounter to cause accidents or cause them to do what they want them to do. They're said to use something called corpse powder that paralyzes people. They can cause sickness, disease, and death. And they utilize something called bone darts. Now, several years ago, and I should emphasize here that this may be later in the presentation, but I want to kind of get it out of the way. The Dene do not talk about skinwalkers, period. You don't go to a Navajo person and say, hey, you know anything about skinwalkers, or even if you knew the word Inagroshi, they would walk away from you. They would not speak to you. I have been very fortunate, very blessed. I mean, there's been plenty of people that wouldn't talk to me, but over the years, I've gotten to be friends with a lot of Native American people, and eventually you find ways, if you reach a level of trust and understanding with them, they will often start to reveal things to you. And things have gotten a little bit more open in modern times, but there's still a lot of reluctance on the part of the natives to even speak about these things. In fact, they say that if you mention the term, either skinwalker or Inagroshi, if you talk about them, it attracts their attention, it draws them to you, and that's something you don't want. This is very much similar to the Middle Eastern jinn. If you go to study some of the Middle Eastern beliefs about the jinn, which it's a very complex topic, but in modern belief, even speaking the word jinn, you don't want to say that around a Middle Eastern person, because they will think you're invoking evil. They'll think you're invoking the attention of these things, and they're malicious entities, so it's not something you want to do. As I said, this causes the term to be tabooed amongst the Navajo and other Native nations, actually in the Southwest at this point. These are just a few of the things that you're not supposed to do out in the Southwest. It's dangerous to walk around on moonlit nights. This is because it's said to be the time that the witches, the skinwalkers, are the most active. You don't leave your clothing outside at night because they can take it. Some of these animals are often said to be signs that skinwalkers are active in the area. So, by some traditions, the owl is a symbol of death. As Europeans, we look at it traditionally as more of a sign of wisdom because it's associated with the old Greek Athena and Celtic deities that are more positive. But in Native traditions, most of them regard it as an ill omen. And if you hear an owl screeching, it means someone's going to die. If you have a close encounter with one, you could be at risk. So in the Southwest, there's reasons that say that seeing an owl means that a skinwalker is present and active in the area. These two guys, these are good friends of mine, they're called the Navajo Rangers. And you ever get a chance to hear them speak, they're phenomenal. They've done a lot to change the view of this phenomenon because these guys are full-blooded Navajo and they will talk about skinwalkers. They'll talk about UFOs and Bigfoot. They have actively investigated on the reservation for quite a few years now. And they're encouraging people to kind of move away from some of these taboos and understand that these are phenomena that we need to study and comprehend in order to come to some conclusions and hopefully reach some solid understanding of what these things are. It's just another shot of the Navajo reservation. There is a reservation on the Navajo reservation. Anybody know that? This area right here. So this area right here, this is the Hopi Reservation, which exists within the Navajo Reservation. And don't get me started on the politics that are involved with that, man. That's a really interesting thing. It's not something you want to bring up either. But the process of becoming a skinwalker. So, just to clarify, for anyone who sort of has a different religious view, in the Southwest, the term witch has no connection to the European term witch. Has no connection to modern witchcraft or Wicca practitioners or anything like that. The term witch to these people is symbolic of something that is completely evil, that has fallen off balance. For the Dene, everything is about staying in balance, walking in beauty. And they have very elaborate, complex ceremonies that help them keep things in balance. It's called a way. So, for instance, someone can be sick or ill and they might need a blessing way. And this has to be performed by a very particular singer. As I said, it's a very elaborate ceremony, and it's designed to bring the person back into balance with the world. Now, to the Dene, someone who has fallen out of balance has done so for sinister reasons. They've decided to pursue things out of a greedy place, whether it's for money or lust or power, whatever the case. If this happens, these people can turn to essentially dark magic. Now, most of the time, skinwalkers are male, although there are female skinwalkers. They are frequently brought in through family members. And without getting too far into it, the Navajo family structure is very complex. It revolves around essentially what we would say is an extended family. So skinwalkers can be introduced to the skinwalker tradition by family members, but one of the kickers is that to be initiated and fully become a skinwalker, the person has to kill a relative, preferably a child. The younger the better. That's part of the process. There's a whole other set of elaborate initiations that they have to go through, and eventually what they do is steal a skin, and that is exactly what it sounds like. This skin is what they use to transform. So they decide they're going to be a skinwalker who assumes a coyote form. They can they'll kill a coyote and take its skin. And usually they will wear this as part of the transformative process. To answer the unasked question, skinwalkers can transform into other people. Now, how do you think that would happen? It's exactly what it sounds like. They would kill the person and take their skin. And there are stories on the reservation, older stories, about someone who suddenly became a different person, started acting in a different way, and tradition said that a skinwalker killed them and took their skin. This is an Edward Curtis photo, a very famous photograph. If you've ever seen it, it's from I think about 1904. It's purportedly a skinwalker, and there's really no way to verify that. It does kind of match some of the traditional regalia that we've heard that skinwalkers did wear. This is an encounter from the 1980s, and it's another creepy one. This sounds very much like a werewolf movie or something, doesn't it? It says, whatever the thing was, it wore a man's clothes. It had on a white and blue checked shirt and long pants, I think jeans. Its arms were raised over its head, almost touching the top of the calf. Now, this thing was running like this. down the interstate, down the highway, and, they clarified it looked like a hairy man or hairy animal in man's clothing, but it didn't look like an ape or anything like that. Its eyes were yellow and its mouth was open. Now, anybody else think that's a creepy image? You just see this thing running alongside you? The legends of skinwalkers, as I said, they came specifically from the Navajo people, but over time, it kind of expanded into other areas of the Southwest. And now, the Utes, Hopis, Zunis, Apaches, they all have skinwalker legends too. The one I'm going to address just a bit today is the Ute tribe, because there's a lot of close association between the Navajo and the Utes. The two tribes for a long time were sort of bitter enemies. There's a story that the Utes sold the Navajos out to the cavalry forces way back in the 1800s, and that as a result, the Navajo cursed the Utes with the curse of the Skinwalker. So The traditional land, you see that line that says hunting ground, that was all regional hunting grounds that the Utes used. It crossed over to Navajo territory. Obviously, even the red circle is the main Ute territory, was crossed over into that too. The Utes are part of the Paiute Nation's much bigger cluster of tribes that go all the way up into Nevada and Idaho. But now, you kind of wonder if the Utes really worked first, because their tribal land is pretty small. It's in Utah, and those yellow regions towards the top part there, that's Ute tribal land. The big cluster here at the bottom in Utah, that's part of the Navajo Nation still. Duchesne City it's called the gateway to the Uinta Basin. The Uinta Basin, home to the famous Skinwalker Ranch. And this whole region, I spent a lot of time in Utah, and this whole region is very strange. It's a mysterious place. There's so many stories out of the whole basin that just don't get told. And once you go out to some of the rural areas and start talking to people, it's phenomenal. But somebody contacted me about an encounter they had in October 2003, and this is a couple of views of the region area close to where he lives. I'm not showing a picture of his property. But this gentleman, his son went out one morning to check on the sheep, and he found them all clustered very close to the house. And it was a very odd thing. He knew that something was wrong. He went and got his father. The son's, at the time, was 20-ish. So he went and got his father and said, something's going on. The father came out. They did a head count, and they found that one sheep was missing. And the father right away said, well, it's a predator or something that's got him scared. It might be a mountain lion coming through or something. So they took off and they started searching the property. They found the sheep. It had been torn to pieces. Most of the interior organs had been eaten. And it was just ripped up in a way that was really disturbed this man. And when he started looking at tracks in the area, while he had expected to find tracks from the mountain lion, he found something that he said was canid. And he started thinking, well, it must be some kind of a large dog or possibly even a wolf. And there are some wild dogs out there they have problems with and so forth. So the gentleman decided, we're going to see if we can catch this thing. And what they did was put all the sheep in the barn, and he and his son took shifts that night waiting outside, hidden in an area outside the house, waiting to see if this predator would come up and stalk the animals again. So they waited most of the night, and just before the morning, the son saw some movement, and he saw something moving across in the distance, and he thought, okay, woke his father up, and he said, I think it's here, I think it's here. So the father is looking at this thing, the two men are watching it. The father raises his rifle up because he's saying, oh, this thing looks like a large wolf, but there's something strange about it. He raises his gun up and gets this thing in his sights. And when he does, this creature stands up on two legs. And it turns around and looks directly at this man as if it just sensed that it was in the rifle scope. This guy was so stunned that he couldn't even fire. He just didn't know how to react. He dropped the scope away. This thing kind of bounded off and was gone. That was the last of it. But as far as I know, it never came back. I had touched base with him a few times, but there are other stories in the same region about creatures like this. Of course, tons of stories from Skinwalker Ranch. That's a view of it. And this is all part of the Uinta Basin. That's a long topic of discussion in itself. This, Skinwalker Ranch, it's said to be a portal area where things are coming in and out, both on the sky, in the sky and on the land. That's an old shot of one of the gates at Skinwalker Ranch. It's a highly secure property, always was anyway, and as far as I know, it still is. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this book. I don't know how much time I have left. What's my time like?
2 hours.
This is normally like a 2-hour presentation. I'm just trying to give you guys some of the highlights. Does everybody know the Bulletproof Wolf story? You know the okay, I'll skip that one then. Crazy story, just the highlights of that thing was, this is the first thing that the Shermans encountered on Skinwalker Ranch. And they shot it point blank with a .357, they shot it with a .30-06. It didn't kill it, it just wandered away. Another view of the ranch, tons of cameras all outside of this thing. You can't officially go on the ranch. But some people maybe have been on the ranch. Thank you. This is one of my favorite stories. I've got to touch on this one. There's a famous story, and there's a couple of different variations of it, but I talked to a native man in Utah who said this story actually did happen, that he had spoken to one of the witnesses. The story is that one or two people were outside of Skinwalker Ranch, just kind of patrolling the area on one of the roads that leads up to the ranch, and they saw two figures standing on the side of the road in trench coats, smoking cigarettes. But the two figures had the heads of dogs. And the witness, of course, was just kind of flabbergasted, started to get out of the vehicle and looked at these things and then thought better of it, got back in the vehicle, and they sort of turned around and then these figures, whatever these things were, had vanished. They were just gone. The Uinta Basin, Uinta County, there's so many Ute stories from this region. There's a story about a place called Dark Canyon. And these are not actually, this is just an example of petroglyphs from the region. I don't have pictures of petroglyphs from Dark Canyon for one simple reason. You can't go back there. I tried to get permission several times, and even knowing a lot of Native people, they wouldn't let me go. The Ute Tribal Council prevents people from going to this spot. And the reason is, they say it's the lair of the Skinwalker. And that if you go there, that you will cause them to be angered, you will cause problems for the tribe, for the people in the region, and everything else. Personally, I think it's very likely that it's probably a traditional initiation area for people who are joining the Skinwalker tradition. But supposedly there are petroglyphs in Dark Canyon, ancient depictions of Skinwalkers from the Utes. That's another shot of the Uinta Basin. I'm going to have to skip this one, but just to give you a kind of closing perspective on Skinwalkers, we talked a lot about the supernatural aspects, but this is a very real thing for people, especially the Navajos, but people in the Southwest in general. And the topic of Skinwalkers has even gone to court a couple times. There's a famous case, 1987, a woman was murdered, Sarah Secondito, and she was a housekeeper for a medical center, as I recall. She was found, her nude body was found behind the medical center. I won't get graphic because I know there's some younger people. Some strange things were done to her body. They arrested a man who was an English professor, George Abney. And initially they arrested this man on suspicion of murder, but he confessed, and he said, "Oh, I did it." However, when the case went to trial, Abney's lawyer said he didn't do it, a Skinwalker killed her. And he pointed out all of these examples, evidence of black magic and rituals that were done around Sarah's body that indicated a Skinwalker was active. Now, the kicker to this is that Abney was convicted. He served 1 year, and then the case was overturned, and he was released. Sarah's family didn't believe that he did it, even though he had confessed. And there's a lot of strange things with this case. You know, Abney was saying that he had trouble distinguishing between dreams and reality. So there's indications that even he was being influenced or messed with by Skinwalkers and maybe had been coerced, mind controlled into confessing to the crime. So this bizarre murder was reopened in 1988. It's still unsolved. One other case, this was a lawyer who was helping with a custody battle, And this woman was trying to get custody of her children, her child. And she claimed that her husband, who was Apache, had used a black magic ritual to curse her. And they found this out because the child, the husband took the child, he was gone longer than he was supposed to be, kept the boy overnight or something. When the son came back, he told his mother, she was asking, obviously, what happened, where have you been? So the boy describes exactly what happened. Oh, we went with this, this man, this elder, out into the wilderness, and this ritual was done, and he had these two dolls, a man and a woman, that he threw in the fire as part of the ritual. And so he's describing all of this stuff. The lawyer, he hears all this. He ended up talking to a Navajo professor, and he said, what exactly is going on here? And the man said, well, this is a skinwalker. And the representations were of the mother and you, the lawyer, in order to win this case. So this lawyer was pretty sharp. He heard all this information, and he decided, okay, I can play this game too. He put what do you call it, a subpoena out for the unnamed medicine man, I think is how he phrased it. He basically called for this guy to testify. And this really frightened the husband, because he suddenly realized that the whole thing had been exposed and that it would all come out in court. The kicker was the judge was Navajo and knew exactly what was going on, and said, this is not happening. So the man, he ended up sort of settling out of court and ending the whole thing. I think this is a great quote to kind of end things. Navajo witchery is the essence of predatory criminality. No law enforcement agency of any kind intrudes into the matter of traditional Navajo self-defense when this extremely ancient evil threatens one's very health and life. So, that is a very condensed version of Skinwalkers, a few highlights. That's my website. I hope you guys had a great time.